Cool. Yeah, thanks so much. Thank you. Thanks for being here. I want to give a bit of an overview how we got to where we are, and what's next on the horizon. So Bitcoin, Ethereum, Substrate, Polkadot. Just a quick show of hands. Who of you has heard about Substrate and Polkadot already? Okay. Who thinks they know what it is? Okay, good. Cool. Yeah, so I'm the CEO of Parity. As was said, we've started the company to build that open source software commons for the future Web3, for giving developers and the builders the tools they need to build the services that will disrupt the Goliath trust-based services that we all rely on at the moment. Make things more flexible, make it easier to benefit from what other people have built, really standing on the shoulders of giants. That's what we want to enable people. So how it all began. So I came to this space about 5 years ago, I think. Back then, people were experimenting sort of with that idea of adding that scripting language on a blockchain. So coming from that initial Bitcoin idea to Ethereum and what Gav turned into that world computer. So not just adding a scripting language, but making it really a blockchain computer. We then left, Gav and I, the Ethereum Foundation, to start Parity, where we further developed the idea of Web3. So not just a blockchain, but like using an entire peer-to-peer network, peer-to-peer web stack, in order to build a better Web3, a better internet that was then called by Gavin Web3. But before I want to dive deeper into the tech, I really want to go back to, where is the, I really want to go a bit back to why we're doing really what we're doing. So starting with Bitcoin, Ethereum, and now Substrate and Polkadot. So while there's a lot of development happening in Bitcoin in particular last year with like SegWit and also the Lightning Network and Ethereum as a whole, we believe it's really necessary to have a much more flexible framework for people to assimilate whatever technology comes along and build it into whatever application they want to build. And this is sort of encoded in Substrate and Polkadot. But why do we do this? So when I came to the space, that was just after the Snowden revelations, I guess. I mean, even before I felt like, oh, okay, something's completely wrong with the way how the internet works. I installed WhatsApp on my phone and was like asking for all the contact details in my phone, like ex-boyfriends and doctors and whatnot. Like, why? I mean, it had a business model, and now these days we're seeing what's happening, like starting with a company that put users first, now getting acquired, it all went to a really bad state. And it's like continuing. I mean, we've seen all the news. I mainly have news from the last year on what's happening with Facebook, but I mean, every week we hear new things. And Facebook aren't the only ones, right? Google pays so much money every year in order to be the prime search engine on iPhones. And they're doing that for a reason, because the data is so valuable. The good thing is that many more people realize that something's completely wrong. I mean, even Tim Berners-Lee, now with the Solid project, is putting a lot of effort into fixing a lot of the things that went wrong with the way how the internet came together. But in essence, like, the tools we rely on, interact, communicate with, are completely broken, and we fall back to trust. And I think it's important to think a bit deeper about what trust is, and I'm going back to a definition by Rachel Botsman. So it's really a confident relationship to the unknown. That's how she defines trust, and I think that's important because we talk a lot about like trustless services and whatnot, but I think it's even more important to have not just trustless services, because I also don't think that this is what humans want, but rather a much more granular way of dealing with trust. Like, I do trust Google that they have really powerful data centers and do know how to really efficiently gain insights in data, or big amounts of data, but I don't trust them to put my privacy first. And that's what I need. That's why I need tools in order to have much more confidence to make this leap of trust and give data to people. But let's go back to 1992, when really the information superhighway and Internet Addict were sort of similar to what we these days have as ICOs and shitcoins as terms, I guess. What went really wrong is that there was no backstop built into the technology, right? So, and this is where we then had to fall back on trust in order to use these services. So it's really that problem of intermediaries, right? That you have to rely on Facebook and WhatsApp to do our communication. We have to rely on Medium, that they don't censor us, likewise for Twitter. And unless we put in place open source software protocols, the digital architecture that we build will just magnify whatever issues we have in society instead of helping us of dealing with it. And it's really just through consensus architecture that we can do better. So what we hope to build is that future Web3, so less trust, more truth, or actually having tools so that we can't be as easily deceived. So to have platforms that reduce the divide between users and service providers, to have much more reliable means of helping applications to stay useful under adverse conditions. And that can be not just intentional, as we see for these services providers, but that can be also completely unintentional, just bad internet. Like, what happens then? What does your application do? And we need like a stable peer-to-peer network infrastructure for that. It's an extensible framework, and I think that's really important for the builders and developers. Completely new way of architecting applications, much more open, extensible, future-proof to assimilate whatever comes along in the future. So you don't get locked in as you get these days when you decide to build on a certain platform. And with blockchain as that hard-coded expectation management layer in that Web3 stack. And while we've come a long way, like we've done a lot of work, Parity we are by now, I think 75 people just working on like second and sort of third wave of blockchain technology. And there are many more people that focus on developing the tech. There's still a lot of problems that we need to fix, right? There's scalability, governance, privacy, interoperability. That's largely, apart from governance, I guess, technical problems. But sort of what enabled blockchain, so that really interesting game theoretic play, also is at the core of a lot of its problems, because the outside ignorance, by which I mean that blockchains can't talk to each other. I mean, there are ways of, or like people are now coming up with ideas how to connect them and bridge them, but really they can't talk to each other, and then that combined with the economic exclusivity and the wish to be the blockchain really needs to maximalism, or what I would call is basically the peer-to-peer online equivalence to nationalism. So, and that is pretty bad, because in the end that slows down innovation, because it's really hard to get changes into the protocols and whatnot. And so we need to overcome that. So we really need to boost that application infrastructure cycle, right? I mean, I don't care, like some people discuss all the time, like is it first that we have to build the infrastructure, or do we need that killer app first? Like I don't care, but what I do see is we need to have frameworks so that innovation can happen fast, so we get those tools in place that we need for a better web. And that's really what we try to do with Polkadot and Substrate, like creating a system in which blockchain can coexist and even make each other stronger, because they build, or like they form in the future that information commons, that blockchain commons. They complement each other to overcome that chain maximalism. So in that sense, Substrate is a technology, a generic framework that people can use to build consensus-based platforms. So that can be a blockchain, doesn't have to be a blockchain, by the way. And And that's combined with Polkadot, which is the first public network that we ourselves built using Substrate. So here's a bit of a diagram what might help you to how you can think about how they complement each other. So Polkadot is basically the networking card, the Ethernet to Substrate, which is really your PC or your operating system for that allows you to build blockchains. So Polkadot, launched by the Web3 Foundation. It's the token, it's the public network, and Substrate the underlying technology. And what you can see here in the Venn diagram also is like ideally they're used together, like as we do it within Polkadot being itself built on Substrate. But really, you can use each of them also in and of itself alone. Like Polkadot, just you can build another parachain without using Substrate, or you just use Substrate because it's a very convenient framework that gives you networking, that gives you all these things that are technologically hard to engineer out of the box. But what Polkadot doesn't want to be is to be in competition with other next-generation chains. So it wants to be an inclusive framework, so you can also interoperate, like say, with technologies like Cosmos, which aims to make tokens interoperable. So that's sort of how we see Polkadot going forward. So why is this? How can I convince you that this is the right thing to look at if you want to look into the next stage of blockchain technology? So some of you might remember those T-shirts that we had at the Ethereum Foundation, like build your own currency in 5 lines of code. Like basically what Bitcoin did in thousands of lines of code, with Ethereum you could all of a sudden do in a basically 20-line smart contract. And here's an example of a smart contract built on Ethereum that gives you your own token. So behind that is a lot of thinking and a lot of lines of code within Ethereum, so that building that currency becomes so easy. So instead of like showing you all those lines of code, I'm showing you a snapshot from the Ethereum yellow paper, just to give you an idea of the complexity that Ethereum basically implemented for you, so building a decentralized application could become easy. And here is what the state transition for Substrate looks like. In and of itself, now 20 lines of code, which sort of similarly first was in Ethereum like this huge amount of lines of code. So that's basically how we abstracted everything or maybe I say it in a different way. So think of like if Ethereum brought to you like that virtual machine, now Substrate gives you an even more general framework to build like many different chains with very different virtual machines on top. So and then this gives you basically a tool to build your own chain, so that applications become like applications as chains, if that makes sense. So not on the smart contract level, but rather think of each application having its own chain, so it can customize its own virtual machine and make it very specific to what you actually need for your particular application. So it's designed to provide maximum technical freedom, maximum security, maximum connectivity, basically drawing on all our learnings from building several different blockchains like Bitcoin, Ethereum. These days we also build a Zcash implementation. So all the learnings we had, we put into Substrate to give you like something that's really easily usable with very little effort, very little constraints. So you can basically build whatever you need. So what do you get with Substrate? Like a lot of things, I think. You get pluggable consensus, so you can choose whatever consensus you want to run on your parachain or on the chain you want to deploy. You get upgradable state transition functions, so a way to on-chain change the mechanics of the blockchain, basically. And Gav demoed that last year at a conference in Toronto. So on-chain governance is one application you get from using that. It's light client first, and I think that's a really important thing these days. So we don't have to, or at least maybe we want to rely on centralized infrastructure for certain things because it's faster, but at least there are different ways of accessing the chain directly with a light client, so we don't have to solely rely on something that's centralized. So that's really important that the idea of having a light client was put into the technology, or everything was architected around, so a light client could be easily delivered. It has it has direct connectivity to Polkadot, a lot of other things, a JSON RPC, transaction queues, all the things you want when you build your own chain. Another thing you get is an entire runtime library, Substrate module library, which you want to use when you customize your chain. So whether you want like a UTXO chain or type of chain like Bitcoin, you can do that, or a chain that looks rather like an Ethereum chain with smart contracts. There are a lot of libraries we already have in place, but we also rely on the community contribute to that library. So minimum effort, maximum freedom, that's at the heart of the Substrate stack. So what can you build with Substrate? We ourselves use it, as I said, for building Polkadot. Recently, we put out a POC where we used it to build what's called Ethereum 2.0. So basically, an Ethereum-like chain built on Substrate with Casper and sharding, so proof of stake and a way of making Ethereum more scalable. Aragon, a project based here in Europe, they recently also announced that they plan to deploy their decentralized organization on Substrate and Polkadot. Commonwealth is experimenting, in particular, with the upgradable state machine to implement a self-improving smart contract blockchain based on Substrate. So if you want to learn about Substrate, we have a lot of resources these days. It's basically what we put most of our efforts in. Like, development is happening fast, so I hope you'll excuse that sometimes things still break, sometimes things are still buggy, but we put a lot of effort into making it really easily accessible. And I'm showing a few links where you can get more information. The talk that Gav did at Web3 Summit last year, I think, is a good starting point to get a better understanding of how much flexibility and how easy Substrate it makes for you to build your own application chain. Then there are a lot, by now, a few examples out there, a token-curated registry that you can access here. This is one of my favorite tutorials. It's a Substrate collectible, so basically a non-fungible token, sort of a CryptoKitty-like example built on Substrate, and it's an entire tutorial that walks you through. Probably a good starting point for those who want to get their hands dirty. Further, there's now a developer hub, so where we collect all our documentations, and then there's also the Substrate chat. If you want to learn more, I think one thing that's important for me, I mean, it's easy to, I'm not a software engineer by training, I'm a mathematician by training, but still it's easy to get overly excited by all the promises of technology. But I think it's, even with a technology like blockchain, or maybe in particular with a technology like blockchain, where people have such high expectations that it could solve a lot of problems, it's important to keep in mind, in the end, it's just a technology, and there are decisions that people will take, or there are things that people do or don't do. Maybe they have too much ego to come together in order to agree on standards or whatnot. And I think it's important that we all keep in mind that there's really a big need for building this better technology, and that's why we started together with Web3 Foundation Web3 Summit last year as a space to bring together the builders. It's not just devs, but also to learn from people that built Web 2. So we had Harry Halpin there last year, who from the W3C, who spoke about their learnings on why coming up with standards failed. It's a talk very worth watching, and we put together another Web3 Summit in August in Berlin. So I welcome you, invite you to join us there. And then as Parity, we also, so if you're interested in building that stuff with us, come to our website. And thank you.